What's going on, everyone? Jeremy here from The Quartering. And again, the group of tolerance, the group of trust the science, the group of being accepting have all collectively lost their mind after Harry Potter author J.K. Rowling dared to bring up, I don't know, science, the fact that biology matters, the fact that people are taking advantage of a system where anyone who wants to say something that appears to be common sense could have their life ruined by the Twitter mobs and all sorts of other insanity, just for, again, basically saying biology is real. Over the weekend, J.K. Rowling, Harry Potter author J.K. Rowling attacks Hollywood law allowing people to self-ID as the opposite gender without a medical diagnosis. The writer and feminist campaigner told her 14 million Twitter followers about the, quote, likely negative consequences of this legislation for women and girls, especially the most vulnerable. The idea is that a man or a woman biologically could, self-select to go to women's prison instead. And to be honest with you, again, why are we focusing on such a small thing? I don't know. But that's what our government wants us to be talking about. When you're talking about that, you're not talking about other important stuff. You can see here, now this tweet has been after she pushes back, a few short days after Shona Robinson, who is the person that spoke out against her, claimed there was no evidence that predators have ever had to pretend to be anything else. Mary Hunter tells concerned, Mary Hunter tells concerned women that the way to address their concerns is to pass the legislations they have concerns about. What started all of this was the day before, where Angie Jones, and again, what's interesting is she didn't get ratioed. People are kind of coming to their senses in some cases, in some places. She didn't even get close to quote unquote being ratioed. She had 14,000 likes to 874 dislikes. Now, of course, there are a lot of people that are in the replies, but she writes, so Angie Jones writes, there is self-ID in my city, which is Melbourne, Australia. Men are self-identifying into female SA recovery services. Say no, and they take you to the Human Rights Tribunal. Women self-exclude. Groups implode. No more services for our most vulnerable women. And there's all sorts of people here saying well, there's no evidence. There's no evidence. You could see an incarcerated woman's lived experience. There's all sorts of stuff. And people know it. And J.K. Rowling writes exactly this. The law Nicola Sturgeon is trying to pass in Scotland will harm the most vulnerable women in society, those seeking help after men do bad things to them. Statistics show that women in jail are already far more likely to have been previously in a bad situation. And she's not backing down. 6 hours ago, writing, multiple women's groups have presented well-sourced evidence to Nicola Sturgeon's government about the likely negative consequences of this legislation for women and girls, especially the most vulnerable. All has been ignored. If this legislation is passed and those consequences ensue as a result, the SNP cannot pretend that it wasn't warned. Essentially, look, again, we're worried about tiny percentages, but here in the United States, California prisons grapple with hundreds of trans inmates requesting new housing. Now, this article, again, I don't know, this isn't exactly the most, high prioritized site, but it says California prison inmate pregnant after state lets biological men into women's prison. Does that mean it was non-consensual? I don't know. This says, we have now heard from 7 different women inside a CCWF that at least one woman, possibly more, is now pregnant after being housed with a male felon who transferred to the women's prison under this law, SB 132. Conditions are described as a nightmare's worst scenario by women locked up in California after the passage. Now the system is bracing for a wave of pregnancies and increased bad behavior in the facilities. Officials in California had to know whether women were going to be gone after or to have casual affairs with these male inmates, because reports show that California is now giving condoms and Plan B to female inmates housed in the prison. Why would they need that? Why would they need that? I guess maybe they're getting down with the guards. I'm sure that happens. I'm sure that happens. This article, J.K. Rowling is still spreading phobic misinformation. J.K. Rowling has created one of the most successful and enduring franchises of all time, but she's problematic AF. For some reason, gender politics are widely lost on the Harry Potter author. No. She just has, she's more concerned with biology. Who has seemingly taken up against railing against trans rights, her sacred duties. As she continues to frequent Twitter tirades, it begs the question, why is this the hill to die on? See, what this is just gaslighting, right? What J.K. Rowling is saying is there may be legitimate cases here, but by having a system which allows people to just self-identify as whatever, I mean, I can't imagine a man who wouldn't rather spend their time in a women's prison. I'm sure it's not all, what you may be thinking of in your head, but it's got to be way better. You're not getting physically overpowered by most of them. We do know that J.K. Rowling is a proud TERF. She's never said that. She wears the badge like it's Gryffindor house colors. Especially, Rowling is hyper concerned with trans individuals being allowed into women's spaces. And over the weekend, she aimed her criticisms at new reforms being deliberated in Scotland. Look, if you don't want to worry about being housed with the wrong gender in your mind, then don't go to prison. I don't understand this. Like you're in prison. You have very few rights. And I'm not sure that we need to be worried about making sure 0.00003% of the population is feeling okay about their prison experience. Nobody, if nothing else, this is yet another reason that you don't want to go to prison. Rowling tweeted this past Saturday about a proposed amendments to the gender recognition reform bill in this country. The changes would instate what is colloquially known as self-ID, allowing for trans individuals to self-identify legally without having to show psychiatric or medical reports, which is absurd. Again, maybe not for everything, but for how you're going to be housed in prison, yeah. Gender self-identification is the law in several countries. This is meant to simplify transition. The bill's website states that the charges would make it so that applicants would be required to live their acquired gender for a minimum of 3 whole months. Wow. If I was facing down a 30-year prison sentence and all I had to do was pretend for 3 months to get out of an all-male prison and spend into a female prison, pretty sure I'd be happy to do it. Take a beating for 3 months and get out and feel those sweet, warm walls again. The idea, the position that, and then all day Saturday, J.K. Rowling was trending on Twitter and people are losing their mind. But again, we're talking about a tiny percentage of the population. And look, if you're worried about how you're going to get treated in prison, then just don't go. It's really not that difficult. This whole idea that the prison's predetermined for these people, so let's make sure. No, you know what? That's yet another reason. You know what I think about in terms of staying out of federal prison is all of the R word that happens. That's enough to keep to I'm not interested in that. I don't want to have to be making my pizza crust out of flaming hot Cheetos and ramen noodles either. Okay? If you're trans and you're worried about not being able to get into the correct housing, in your opinion, then don't be forced into that situation. Because the number of people, my point is, that will take advantage of this will be innumerably higher than the percentage of people that this will actually help. J.K. Rowling is 100% correct, and slowly but surely, she's becoming more and more like palatable. She's still ridiculous, but it's funny when she just says something that's common sense and the way people react. It's like a liberal litmus test. I don't agree with really many of her opinions, but her opinion that biology matters is one that we can both share. I hope you enjoyed this video. We'll talk to you again real soon.